Hey everybody, Dr. Phil here. This is going to be a video on evaluating a company's external environment. So let's take a quick look at this. So the first test of a winning strategy, how well does the current strategy fit the company's basically current situation, right? So there are two facets of the company's situation. It's external environments. So think about what's going on outside, the competitive conditions in the industry in which it operates, not just with competitors, but maybe, the economy as a whole, for example. And also its internal environment, the company's resources and organizational capabilities. So, what are some relevant factors when we think about the macro environments? Well, they certainly play a significant role in shaping management's decisions regarding the company's long-term direction, objectives, strategy, and business model. They should be on the broad outer ring representing the macro environments. The factors considered are important enough to shape management's decisions. So, as an example of something that maybe we would look at the macro environment, maybe for a firm that has to borrow money a lot, we might look at interest rates, for example, and what's the prediction with interest rates? If they're going to go up and we need to borrow more money, that's going to be costly. If they're going down, then the cost of borrowing, cost of capital would be cheaper. So the macro environment encompasses the broad environmental context in which a firm is situated and is comprised of six principal components: political factors, economic conditions, sociocultural forces, technological factors, environmental factors, and legal/regulatory conditions. Now, what we also have is what we call Pestel analysis that can be used to assess the strategic relevance of the six principal components of the macro environment. So Pastel is basically, if you haven't heard the acronym, political, economic, social, technological, environmental, and legal forces. So that's just listed them out again for you there. So the state of competition, where are we now? So industry competitive forces are assessed using the five forces model of competition. You can look up, you can go to Google, just type in like Michael Porter's five forces, you'll see it. It's the most powerful and widely used tool for assessing the strength of the competitive forces that affect an industry's attractiveness. So think of this as like a tool to figure out, is this an attractive industry? Maybe it's not. Maybe it's something that we don't want to get into because it's got very high barriers to entry, for example. And the dynamics of competition are not the same from one industry to another. So here are some examples of competitive forces affecting industry. Not an exhaustive list, by of course, just some of the highlights, if you will. Bargaining power of suppliers. The bargaining power of buyers. Substitute products of firms in other industries. The bargaining power, of course, of suppliers. The threat of new entrants into the market. How easy or not is it to get in? If you're already in it, ideally you want that to be high. If you're not in it, of course you want that. You want the threat. You want it to be easy to get in. And of course, the rivalry among the competing sellers. So whether the seller-buyer relationships represent a minor or significant competitive force really depends on a couple of things. The first, and possibly the most important, if some or many buyers have sufficient bargaining leverage to obtain price concessions and other favorable terms. And also the extent to which buyers are price sensitive. And, a lot of that's going to depend on what the item is. Like, for example, like, luxury versus just something that you need, like a want versus a need. If it's something you have to have, you're probably less price sensitive. You probably wish you could be price sensitive, but you may not have that luxury. So when is the bargaining power of buyers stronger? So the buyers gain bargaining leverage when their cost of switching to competing brands or substitutes are relatively low. Few buyers for the product or service exist, or a buyer is particularly important to the seller. Maybe it's like a big customer, for example. Overall buyer demand is weak, and buyers are well informed about products, prices, and costs. And of course, with the advent and proliferation of the internet, it's now easier than ever to find that stuff out. I'm sure much to the chagrin of some firms. And buyers can integrate backwards into the business of sellers. So the strength of competitive pressures from sellers of substitute products really depends on whether substitutes are readily available and attractively priced. Really have to be both. The buyers view the substitutes as comparable or better in terms of quality, performance, and other relevant attributes. And the costs that buyers incur in switching to the substitutes are going to be, are they high or low? And now, industry suppliers can exert substantial bargaining power or leverage if the supplied item is a commodity that's readily available from many suppliers. So you basically got a lot of choices. Industry members are able to switch their purchases to another if it's very easy to do that. That's going to give bargaining power. Certain required inputs are in short supply, and certain suppliers provide a differentiated item that enhances the desired performance, quality, or image of the industry's product. Now, industry suppliers can exert substantial bargaining power or leverage when they provide specialized equipment or services that yield cost savings to industry members in conducting their operations. So think about maybe, machinery, for example, that's very customized. A large fraction of the cost of the buyer's industry product is accounted by the cost of a particular input. Obviously, that's going to make a difference. Industry members are not major or large customers of suppliers, and it makes good economic sense for industry members to vertically integrate backward. So, what are the barriers to entry? So, here are just some. So, sizable economies of scale in production or other areas of operation, cost and resource disadvantages not related to scale of operation, strong brand preferences and customer loyalty, high capital requirements, restrictive regulatory policies, difficulties in building a network of distributors, retailers, and securing space on retailers' shelves, tariffs and international trade restrictions, industry incumbents that can launch initiatives to block a successful entry, and the expected reaction of incumbent firms affects threat assessment as credible defensive maneuvers can raise newcomer costs and also risks. So when is the competitive force of rivalry most intense among competing sellers? Well, when the number of competitors increases and are more equal in size and capability, so there's no one, clear leader, and there's a lot of people in that field, a lot of firms in that field. When buyer demand is slowing or declining, when it's less costly for buyers to switch, when sellers possess excess capacity and or inventory, when sellers' products are less differentiated, and when diversity amongst competitors' objectives, strategies, and countries of origin increases, and also when high exit barriers prevent unprofitable companies from leaving the industry. So what about industry rivalry? So we have what we could call cutthroat, which is very brutal. Competitors engage in protracted price wars or employ other aggressive tactics, mutually destructive to profitability. So basically, they just sort of hurt each other in that sense. It can also be fierce, strong. This is where a vigorous market share battle reduces the profit margins of most industry rivals to bare bones levels. So again, kind of self-defeating. And then moderate or normal, maneuvering amongst industry rivals while lively and healthy still allows most rivals to earn acceptable profits. So obviously most firms are going to want to try to fall closer to that sort of that moderate or, normal level. And then also weak. Industry rivals satisfied with their sales growth and market share rarely undertake offenses against their competitors. They sort of got what they wanted, so now they're in more of a sort of a holding kind of phase. So as a rule, the stronger the collective impact of the five competitive forces, the lower the combined profitability of industry participants. The stronger the forces of competition, the harder it becomes for industry members to earn attractive profits. So with that being said, the ideal competitive environment for earning superior profits occurs when suppliers and customers are in weak bargaining positions. Obviously, that's not good for us as consumers. There are no good substitutes. Again, not good for us as consumers. High entry barriers which deter entry of new competitors, and also internal rivalry produces moderate competitive pressure. So when do these forces result in unattractive industry conditions? Well, when an industry is competitively unattractive, when all five forces are producing strong competitive pressures. There's internal rivalry among competitors, which is strong. Low entry barriers result in entry of new competitors. Competition from substitutes is intense, and suppliers and customers are in strong bargaining positions. So let's talk a little bit about these driving forces. So you've sort of heard me allude to those a little bit. Driving forces are the major underlying causes of change in industry and competitive conditions. Some driving forces originate in the outer ring of the company's macro environment, but most originate in the company's more immediate industry and competitive environment. So something that would be more sort of further out, more very much more kind of macro would be like, interest rates. It's not directed at any one firm, it just sort of affects everybody. Um, and then something that would be maybe like more in the industry, maybe the cost of a certain good. Maybe if you're home building, the cost of lumber suddenly skyrockets. Here we see some common driving forces. I won't go through every single one of these. I'll just kind of pick a couple out, but you can certainly read through these. I would say one is certainly increasing globalization. That's good. I think we're going to see that continue. Technological change and manufacturing process innovation. Technological change. Think about the proliferation of AI. And then I'll just pick one more. Yeah, regulatory influences and government policy changes. As in most countries, as they go from sort of, one administration to another, then, they make changes, and then maybe somebody else comes in, they get undone, maybe they get solidified. And then we have this idea of strategic group mapping and strategic groups. So strategic group mapping is a technique for displaying the different market or competitive positions that rival firms occupy in the industry. A strategic group is a cluster of industry rivals that have similar competitive approaches and market positions. So the idea of this is if you imagine it as sort of like a graphic, maybe sort of a continuum, we don't like if we're any one firm in that continuum, we don't want to be like super close to anybody else because that's obviously not going to be good for our profitability. So what strategic moves are rivals likely to make next? So a strategic profile of rivals can include the following. What is the current strategy of the rival? So that could include the rival's market position, competitive advantage basis, and its investments in infrastructure, technology, or other resources. What are its objectives? Its performance on current financial and strategic objectives, and whether management is under pressure to improve. And also capabilities, its current set of capabilities and efforts to acquire new capabilities. All right, thanks for watching this somewhat short video, and I will see you all again in a future video. Take care.